Okay, good evening
Yeah.
and welcome to the South Burlington Development Review Board for March 7th, 2023. I'm Dawn Philibert. I'm the chair of the board, and I'd like to introduce other board members who are present. Stephanie Wyman and Quinn Mann, John Stern, Frank Kochman, Mark Baer, and from the staff, the city staff, Marla Keene and Paul Connor, Director of Planning. Thank you all for being here. There are a number of ways to participate in this hearing. One is to attend as you are. And if you are doing so, it's important that you sign in with your contact information in the back table to record your participation should you ever wish to challenge any of the decisions later. People can also attend virtually. And if you do that, it would be helpful if you submit your comments, your contact information on the chat function. And if you call in, please let us know you're calling in by emailing Marla with your contact information. And her email is mkeene@southburlingtonvt.gov. This meeting is being recorded, and I would like to start with number one on the agenda, emergency evacuation procedures. There are doors in the back of each corner of the auditorium. In case we have to evacuate, go out those doors and turn left or right, and you'll be outside. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items?
Nope.
Hearing none. Announcements. I would like to make an announcement. Yes, thank you. Our board member, Stephanie Wyman, has just been named Young Engineer of the Year in Vermont. So congratulations, Stephanie. We are pleased that you're with us and work with us, and thank you for that. Are there any other announcements or reminders? Are there any comments or questions from the audience? Not related to the agenda. Hearing none, we will go ahead and start reviewing projects. Okay, agenda item number 5. Continued sketch plan application SD 2302 of Casey Douglas to subdivide an existing 1.29 acre lot development with a single family home and barn located within an existing 5.52 acre plan unit development into 2 lots of 0.69 acres, lot 6A, and 0.60 acres, lot 6B, for the purpose of demolishing the existing single-family home and barn and constructing a new single-family dwelling on each lot at 1200 Dorset Street. Who is here for the applicant?
Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates.
Hi, Dave.
Good
Welcome. Let's go ahead and swear you in. Let me just ask first, are there any recusals or disclosures? No. Okay. Raise your right hand.
Sketch plan.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the
Sketch. No swearing at sketch.
sketch? This is still sketch. Okay.
Sorry.
No swearing at sketch, just so
right.
keep it clean.
Yep. Donna, can I interrupt for just 1 second? Because we don't have CCTV here. I just want to make sure, can somebody at home turn on your mic and make sure that you can tell us that you can hear us, and we'll make sure that we can hear you?
I can hear you.
Great. Thank you, Casey. All right, we're good.
Great, thanks. Okay. So one of the issues that the board talked about during our earlier deliberations today was an issue that came up 2 weeks ago around should we be reviewing this as a subdivision within the PUD or an amendment to the existing PUD. And the board decided that we want to review this as a PUD amendment. Now, my question to Marla is, what does that mean for our discussion tonight, or having decided that, are we, do we have everything we need to close?
I think so, unless Dave has any questions for you.
No, we're just looking for a direction from you.
Okay. Any other comments from the board or questions?
No,
Okay.
I think we had pretty clear direction at the last
Okay.
meeting.
Great. I'd entertain a motion to close.
We don't need to do a motion to close, just see you next time for
Okay.
sketch.
Public comments? Are there any public comments?
None online.
Okay. All right. Thank you. See you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. I think Dave might be representing the next project too.
Don't go.
Item number 6, final plat application SD 2303 of Civil Engineering Associates to amend a previously approved plan for a 10-unit plan unit development. The amendment consists of reducing the front setback for lot 8, 80 Long Drive, from 30 feet to 20 feet at 0 Long Drive. Who are here for the applicants?
My name is Jack Milheim with Civil Engineering Associates, and I'm here with John and Amy Allen, the owner of the.
Okay. Thank you. Any disclosures or recusals? No. Okay, hearing none. This is a final plat application. Is it just the 3 of you? Do you have anyone online participating? No, okay. I'm going to swear you in. Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, could you please lean in a little bit and make sure your mic is on?
Yeah, feel free to pull those right up. Okay, what we're going to do is walk through the staff report and focus on any comments that are made or questions. So this application constitutes a minor amendment to an existing PUD. So.
Can I give a little exposition on this?
Sure.
So the board most members, I think, have been here for Long Drive in some form or another. Long Drive is a 10-lot subdivision within the golf course. It's a bit funny in that it was largely decided by the courts. So the rules are largely there are some DRB elements that hold, but it was a decision that was issued by the courts. And one of the major components was that this tree stand, which exists within the golf course, needs to remain a visual significant element of the South Burlington skyline. And so to that end, there is a tree preservation handbook and tree preservation plan, which CEA has been a wonderful steward of and has worked very closely with us to make sure everybody's 100% on the same page about what can and cannot be done in those. This was written 10 years ago, more. And, it was written by the courts, so it doesn't necessarily read the way it would read if we had written it or if the engineer had written it, but either way, it's what we're all beholden to. This application is to amend the setbacks approved as part of that subdivision. It's not to amend the tree preservation area or to amend the rules that affect that tree preservation area, but it's to request that the Allens be allowed to reduce the front setback on lot 8 from 30 feet to 20 feet so that they have 10 more feet in which to build their building. I think that there has been a little bit of confusion about how that interplays with the tree preservation area, and we can talk about that as we go through the project.
Do you have a question, Mark? No, okay.
No, I'm just.
Thank you, Marla. Let's go to, let me just ask, do you have any brief comments to make before we go through the staff comments?
I don't. I thought it was a good staff report, and I think we can answer Marla's questions.
Okay, good.
And
All right, so number 1, staff recommends the board ask the applicant to describe the impacts of the tree preservation zone of their proposed building footprint with and without the modifications of the front setback.
and I'm happy to do so.
Please do.
The sketch that's on the screen right now depicts a potential footprint for a house with the proposed 20-foot front yard setback, the 30-foot setback isn't shown on that sketch.
Could you
Um,
please speak up and
oh.
pull the mic toward you? We want to make sure all the members of the board can hear you.
Okay, so the sketch that you're looking at is depicting the 20-foot front yard setback. We've shown a footprint that's been moved forward to that. I want to make a note that a 20-foot front yard setback is the current dimensional standard for the underlying zone. So we're not asking for any type of variance. We're asking for some relief, allowing this house to be able to be positioned forward so that we can create some more space or some buffer for patio, deck, garden area between the house and the tree preservation line. If this house was 10 feet back, that 20-foot dimension that we're showing would be 10 feet. And to put a set of steps, we're working on a lot that is sloping from the cul-de-sac easterly at about 8 or 9% downhill. And so there's grading issues that would be really benefited by keeping the house forward. It has no effect actually on the cutting or the tree preservation line. We've shown that, although the preservation line would have to be moved with the house in certain parts of it that don't overlap the existing footprint that was kind of approved.
Yeah, that part gets really confusing. The tree preservation handbook allows clearing within 20 feet of the building footprints that were proposed at the time it was written. So Jack has shown that black dashed line is the footprint that was shown. So that blue blob without the hand markups is what would have been allowed if the Allens were to build their home exactly where Paul has just outlined in red. If the Allens don't build in that, they can keep the portions of the blue that they are still within, but the portions of the blue that they're not within, which Jack has shown with that handwriting scratch out, they wouldn't get that tree clearing area anymore. What this change wouldn't do is it wouldn't allow them to construct the home within the tree preservation area, which is the light yellow hatch. So the way they've shown this sample footprint wouldn't exactly work, but they could still build, forward 10 feet, and it's that. So Paul's outlining it now. There, to the left of that red line that Paul just drew, would still not be allowed, and to the right of that second line Paul just drew would still not be allowed. This wouldn't change the tree preservation area and what can be built in it.
Okay. Questions? From the
But
board?
this is just a sample.
Questions, comments?
I guess one question I have is, right now, I mean, I've been out there a lot this past winter because I just walk it. And I've noticed that you guys have lost quite a few trees out there. It seems to be every other week. And there's a couple in the golf course that are leaning precariously into the development that are definitely have to come down. Where we have do you have a cataloging of what preservation trees have actually been lost out there?
We inventoried and updated this plan a few years ago with certified arborist Bill DeVos from TreeWorks. And he and I went out there, we inventoried what was remaining and in good shape and made comments about trees but that's dynamic. That changes in a windstorm. And so we don't have an inventory of what's been lost.
Okay. Well, I know they've been tagged, right? The trees that are to be preserved have been tagged.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if you know approximately how many of those tagged trees have been lost, because it seems though every week I go and walk and there's another tree that's been cut because they blocked the road going through there. They've, so I'm just wondering how many trees that are in the tree preservation area have already gone down. And it's not saying it's a moot point, because I think it is very important for this tree preservation area is maintained to the best of its ability. But are there trees in the outline area that are going to be affected? I guess that's my question.
By moving this setback forward?
Yep.
No.
Okay. And then the next question is, I noticed on the subdivision plan that this is the only lot that's proposed to be moved from 30 feet to 20 feet.
We did that. The Allens worked with Paul. They're coming up with ideas, all kinds of ideas. Some of these were before we helped Marla and Paul and Marty sort out the original footprint and the 20-foot buffers.
Right.
But there were things that, this was a concept that seemed to make sense and still seems to make sense in terms of trying to, maintain space from the back of the house to that buffer line. And so,
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing that it doesn't make sense, because you're right, the topography out there is pretty steep and drastic. I guess my question is, like, I think lot 9 has been built, correct?
that is correct.
And lot 6 has been built. Are those the only 2 houses that have been built out there?
Yes,
Okay, so lot 9 obviously is maintaining that 30-foot front yard setback.
yes.
You're asking to move lot 8 to 20 feet. I guess the only thing I'm asking is, if the rest of the lots are built at the 30-foot, is this going to feel out of character for the neighborhood?
I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because as you turn off of Golf Course Road and you come around the corner, the road splits and drives downhill
Right.
to the east, and it's fairly level at and the houses above on the west side, the dramatic grade change there.
Right.
I think it's going to look natural. And I think that with the tree preservation line between 7 and 8, and maybe some replanting, I don't think it's going to affect the curb appeal of the subdivision.
I think the topography and the layout of the lots is, I agree. I don't think it's going to be noticeable. I'm just noting that it's the only lot that's going to be going down to 20 feet and the rest are maintaining the 30-foot.
And I will say that just the shape of not necessarily the 20-foot buffer, that polygon is pretty uniform, but the tree preservation line was very jagged and very segmented, and that's a little unlike the rest of the properties, other than maybe lot 10. 10's down and tucked in a little hole. Or on 5. But anyway, that's
Could you orient me a little bit? Is the tree buffer between Long Drive and the structures, or between the golf course and the structures?
it's between the golf course and the structures. Or most of it. Some of it darts in and out between the houses, and it would vary depending on what lot you were looking at.
My sense is that it was set to basically give some space for buildings, but otherwise retain all the trees. So it's almost like the home pads are carve outs from the Long Drive tree preservation area. I don't know if you'd agree with that assessment or not.
Any other questions before we move on? We have what we need? Okay,
Sorry,
go ahead, John.
you said 9 is already built out?
Yeah.
Are they gonna complain about the 20? Are we gonna be hearing from them?
No, they've talked to the owners of that lot, and they had
They're good with it.
nothing negative to say.
Okay. Let's see, the second comment from the staff, it is about the garage setback, and the regulations require garages to be set back 8 feet from the front of the house. What are your thoughts about that?
That was, quite honestly, this footprint was drafted as a concept, and my thoughts on it would be, this would be a great place to sort of waive that requirement, because we're trying to create space in the backyard for activities or a terrace or a raised bed garden or whatever the Allens enjoy doing. They have kids, they might have a play area there. But with that being said, if it's all dependent on whether the house is allowed to be moved forward.
Right.
Because if it stays, if that wouldn't be approved and there was a 30-foot setback, that Marla can clear this up, but my understanding is that 8 feet would go away. Is that correct, Marla? Because it's this was part of a approved PRD prior to 2018 when the rule changed.
Right, yep.
And so effectively, by moving this garage back 8 feet now, you're going to be in the same location that it would be, or very close to where it would have been
The
allowed.
garage would be, right.
Yes,
But the house
but the house would be
could move
forward.
forward.
I think from a design and the giving flexibility in terms of design, once again, with grading and a driveway that's going downhill, being able to keep the garage closer to the street is really helpful, but
And we can waive the 8-foot requirement?
So the way it is laid out in the staff report is that it's a question of whether the board considers. Sorry, this was one that Marty did, so I'm trying to phrase it succinctly. These are standards that are under the current LDR. Because they're asking for an amendment to the current LDR, usually we say, okay, everything that you're touching has to meet the current rules. This is sort of marginal because does this affect the current? Is this proposal affecting this rule or is it not affecting this rule? And that's up for you guys to decide. So the standard is buildings have to be going to the street and the garages have to be set back 8 feet. Because they're requesting a setback change, are they now subject to this rule?
Well, I know that we try to avoid having garages flush with the house or in front of the house. Because they're not, it's not as, your eyes go right to the garage. It's not as aesthetically pleasing, but could we, for example, say 5 feet or 4 feet so that
Right,
it's-
yeah, you could modify the standard. It is a PUD, and dimensional standards are modifiable under a PUD.
What do other folks think about this?
I'd like to know whether the designer thinks that requiring some recess is not feasible.
it is feasible.
It's
I was
feasible.
just suggesting that, I mean, it would be nice if it could be a little more forward, just because of this space that we're trying to create on the backside of that flexibility. But if we were held to that 8-foot standard, it really wouldn't, the buffer gets moved back.
So if we moved it back 4 feet, in other words, if we adjusted the 8 feet to 4 feet, but it still had to be recessed behind the building, you could live with that.
Absolutely.
So this is something the board can decide on deliberations as well. You just need enough information to
Okay.
close. You don't
And it's
need to make a
helpful know that
decision in the
you could-
moment.
You could live with that.
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of that. I should
mean,
let
it
John
is-
speak, but
It is. It is high adventure in the Vermont winters with the,
Sure.
with the actual, we're trying to avoid, crashing a car into the garage. If you guys know the grade there, you walk it all the time. You can understand what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
You're going to hear the crash when you're on the walk
Yeah.
as I drive into the driveway. So we're just trying to do a safety thing there too. And we don't want to build anything that's going to look weird architecturally. We need to understand the footprint to do the architecture. We're kind of in a catch-22.
Right,
And this is what we're trying to get to.
sure.
And we do want to have more of a backyard there because so it doesn't look weird against the tree preservation. So by pulling it up, actually gives a better view for the people on the right, the provost, our neighbors on the left. And as you
Mhm.
said, Marla, it's a weird lot. And so we're just trying to, Paul gave us some guidance on how to make it easier.
So one question I have is the footprint that we're seeing, looking at on this sketch where you've modified the tree buffer. It's not at the 20-foot line. Are you planning on putting the house at the 20-foot or you just ask for 20 feet to give you the flexibility to move it forward? Beyond the 30-foot, footprint that was approved. No, here's the 20 feet. And then you can see the garage is probably another foot or two away from it, but the main house is probably 3 or 4 feet at like 23 or 24 feet.
Can you bring the diagram up?
we didn't push the house
Okay.
right to the front.
Well, that's my
And
question.
we
is-
could.
Are
And
you,
the-
I'm saying is we're grant, if we move forward with this and we grant the 20-foot,
Right.
but we also ask you to recess the garage 3 feet, 4 feet. you know, if you, not saying, I'm not advocating pulling it all the way to the 20-foot point, but if you bring the house forward and move the garage back slightly, you're probably going to end up with the same backyard area.
That's our thought. And we didn't put the footprint right to the setback.
And we're not passing on location, we're not passing on the footprint, we're just passing on the setback. Right?
Correct.
Yes,
So it's not an issue.
yes. And
But
so
I want to clarify, you're saying that there's a steep pitch there and if you
it's
go
not,
back,
it's 8%. It's an 8% slope practically from the setback line down to the, and
So I'm
8 to
trying
9% slope.
envision what happens if you move it back 4 feet.
Not 4 feet isn't
No, it's not.
significant enough to,
You're still getting studded.
we're
stairs.
still gonna get everything that the Allens want, really.
Yeah.
We're-
Marla, can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
I understand this was a project that was remanded back to us. And so therefore it originally was the previous regulations, which didn't require the garages to be set back 8 feet, but because we're touching the regulations, we have some flexibility, but the staff comments were addressing the current regulations. Are the other 9 lots in the subdivision not required to have the front? They could have the garage, 8 feet in front of the main house?
Unless they came in for an amendment
Okay.
of setback or some other amendment, yes.
Okay. All right. So
Some
part
of
of
these
me
lots
is-
are even trickier than this one. Lot 10, for instance, is sort of laid out so that the tree preservation area is all along the front except for space for a driveway. So you have to kind of weave through. I wouldn't be surprised to see that lot in for a requested amendment at some point as well.
Okay. Any other
So-
questions or?
My only comment is at this point, I'm not even as concerned about even asking for the garage to be set back if it could potentially be the only house in the neighborhood with a setback garage. I mean, if you do it, I think it'd be a better architectural. There's a reason why the
Well,
regulations are there, but
The point, but we don't know that yet. In other words, if those houses aren't built yet,
right, but they're not required under the regulations to do it.
but they may wind up with setback, with recessed
Yeah.
garages anyway, because they look better.
Yeah, but you're right.
Right.
Right, so I advocate you pushing it back, but I don't know if I don't know if I personally would need it to be a condition that it's set back because none of the other houses are required by it, only to keep the neighborhood feel to it, so.
Right,
that's-
it's only required for when you have the doors facing the street too.
Right.
But there's not much room for these lots to
You're not
have
driving
access
further
from
past.
the side.
This
think
is
we
in
can
the
keep it to
SEQ
deliberation.
and garage setbacks
Yeah.
have been in the SEQ for longer than they've been citywide.
Right.
And even before that, in the SEQ, there was in the golf course PUD, garages had to be flush and not protruding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't apply here, but it does apply to other portions of the golf course PUD.
I think it's something we can discuss in deliberations. It sounds like the applicant is amenable to whichever solution allows you guys to move forward with the project, so.
Yes.
And I think we can be reasonable in just deliberations.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's pause a minute to take some public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment? Any online, Paul? No, okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Hello?
Hi, this is Mike Provost.
Hi.
I'm at 170 Golf Course Road, so I'm the adjacent property owner, and I also own the lot 7 next to this.
Okay,
So my concern is that, well, 2 things. If this gets approved, you've got 8 other lots that all of a sudden come in and want to make adjustments and changes. And when I bought lot 7, I asked about these things and was told that because this was a court decision, that this could not be changed. And that I was stuck with the limitations that were there. So I just don't see how this can get decided upon by you. I think it has to go back through the court systems. And the other thing is lot 6 has already been before you for a rear yard setback from 30 to 26, and that was denied. So I don't know how the precedent is set and how you can approve this one, but deny the request on lot 6. And again, I'm concerned that, you do this one and you got 8 other people coming back in to move this forward. That this was asked by the court to set these parameters, and they wanted to know what was going to be built in here. If they gave the developer if they ruled on this And they were pitched a plan with this tree preservation plan, and that's what they went with. So I just, as much as I'd like this house as far away from lot 7 as possible, I just don't, I don't want to see this set as a precedent for the other lots. And the other concern I had was, and I think Marla addressed it, is part of that building footprint is in the tree preservation plan. So is that just an error?
That's not an error. When we place that, basically, that footprint of that house overlays on top of the existing, of the approved footprint. You can see that if you build exactly that buffer in the tree preservation handbook, in a cleared area, you have the ability, or it was designed in that cleared area to be able to build accessory structures, driveways, playgrounds.
That's not the way I interpret it. You can clear 20 feet from the house, but you can't have structure on there.
Well, it says that structures are allowed in a cleared area. And that's where it's
In the original, not the 20-foot buffer.
So
You can clear in the original outline, and then there's a 20-foot buffer that if you have to clear to put the house in, that's okay. But you can't build a house in there.
we generally don't get into back and forth dialogue during public comment, but please tell us if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share, and we'll consider all of this during our deliberation.
No, that's, again, I think you can sense my frustration with this whole project, and you know, the
Right.
city was totally against this for 20 years. And now that we're here, all of a sudden there's no one watching this project. And like someone mentioned, there's several trees that have come down. So it just seems like anything goes now. And we've got individual lot owners coming back in, amending this court order decision and trying to change the footprint of the house. So it's not what we were told and what we were, you know, what we have been told the last 20 years. And I, in good faith, bought lot 7 to give me a buffer to hopefully be removed from this project. And when I purchased that, again, I went through all these questions and was told, no, you can't do this. This is what it is. And that's the end.
They run the risk of being sued.
Thank you.
Thank
Will
you.
we, yeah, will we be able to find documentation of Mike's?
Yeah, so I can certainly share the tree preservation handbook with you guys. If there's any questions you want to discuss now, you know, you're certainly welcome to do that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Mr. Provost raises a good question or a good point, because obviously this was a project that was remanded back to the DRB and we had very limited scope for review. So, you know, I do have a question whether or not we as a DRB are allowed to make modifications to the setbacks. And if that was one of the things that was remanded back to us, or is that something that we as the board put in when it was remanded back for our review?
Gosh, that's a great question, Mark. Paul, do you remember if the setbacks were part of the remand or was that decided by the board? I know the tree preservation area was handed to you,
Yes.
but you had to make decisions on other things and.
Yeah, I mean, the history of it was that the city initially denied the project for development and habitat block. The E-Court approved a plan with the tree preservation handbook and then said, proceed to final plat for the board.
Right.
It's hard, I don't think that the court sort of individually picked out pieces of it. So I would say, I mean, the board approved a preliminary plat. So if it was in the preliminary plat, the court approved the preliminary plat. So if it was in the preliminary plat. However, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, and we can talk about this in deliberation, but when you talked about an application on lot 6, there was the question of what authority does the board have? And I believe that your guidance was that the board has some authority to look at modifications so long as they are within the boundaries of what the what was the intent of all that, and that still Cub Highlands is not tripped as reevaluating something that was decided previously
Well-
without a change in circumstance.
Well, maybe it's too far in the weeds to get a clear answer here, but what was the basis of denial in the first place? Which is the only way we can determine what it was that the court decided.
Right. Broadly speaking, the basis of the original denial from the DRB was that there was a standard in the regulations that said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact words, but protect wildlife habitat. The board denied the entire project based on that. That went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that that standard was invalid and therefore approved the project on all of it.
It itself was invalid?
Yes.
Okay, so the court then, as far as I'm concerned, the fact that there was a particular plat that that was before the court when it ruled on it does not limit our ability to make any amendments we would make to any other plan, because that's simply not something the court constrained. It said, the habitat standard is invalid, doesn't apply, go forth.
Right,
That's
now-
not a reason.
Right.
So-
Now, the E-Court approved a tree preservation plan as part of their, so in the remand from the Supreme Court to the environmental court, the environmental court had agreed on the tree preservation plan. So that's part of their decision, ultimate decision.
Okay, but since what I'm trying to get at is, and I think that's incidental to what we call the gravamen of the decision. That's not what the case was about. Yeah, right? The case was about an invalid standard. The fact that they approved a particular plan should not, and now it's back in our court, shouldn't limit our jurisdiction to consider modifications to that plan if the LDR otherwise permit those particular modifications, as long as we're not touching on this habitat
Right.
business. You see what I'm saying? That makes sense?
Yes, and the court, in approving the tree preservation plan, looked at, there were other standards of aesthetic and other elements of creating sort of a visual forested appearance that wasn't about habitat per se. It was but I agree with everything you're just saying there. But I'm also not on the board, so.
Okay, and if any interested person doesn't like it, they can take it back up.
I do recall that when it was remanded back to us, our limited scope, I think our limited scope was literally limited to reviewing of the tree protection plan with the intent of what it was meant to do, which is to provide screening between the development and the golf course.
Yeah, I pulled up the remanded decision
Right.
from 2018 that I did work on. And there are a few standards that were invalidated by the courts, and those, as Paul mentioned, were pertaining to the appearance of the area, habitat protection, and then the other criteria continue to exist. So,
But-
circulation and all the things that we're used to reviewing things for.
But is there anything about this application that makes an incursion upon the tree preservation plan?
This application is really purely to move a setback.
And doesn't affect the tree preservation?
We'll have some conversation about the rules, but the answer is it depends on how we deal with that one corner.
Right, but that's not this application.
But that's
the
not this
conversation.
application, and that's something that's just, that's an interpretation of, and it may not come into play at all. When the Allens and their architect if they have a decision in their favor, then they can start working on a design that works with the tree preservation area as it's shown. That was I had another conversation with Marty Gillis about that corner on Thursday before I submitted the application. And that sketch was drawn based on that conversation. And if that's not quite right and we have to rework that, we'll have that conversation again with all Marla and Marty.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Looking for information to help us make this decision? Or are we set to move on? Hearing none? And
I
we
still
just-
had a question. Can I?
Sure.
So what happens with that corner that, again, I'm under the understanding that that's part of the tree preservation area and can't be built on. And that's my first question. The second question is, how can you deny someone a rear yard setback of only 4 feet of an adjustment and then accept this one in the front yard, which is more of an impact on the neighborhood?
Dawn, if you'd like me to answer the first question, maybe I can paraphrase what we've been saying, which is that the plan that was submitted with this application is a sample plan, and they are not asking for approval of that building as shown. They're only asking for approval of a reduced front setback. So the building footprint is still being worked on, and what I have said is that I don't think that that would be allowed as they have it in the front corner, but CEA is saying they would, so that'd be something we decide administratively if the board approves the front setback waiver. As to second question, I've lost track of what it was.
How, could you restate the?
Oh, about the, yeah, so that the denied application, if the board wants to hear more about the history there, I'd be happy to provide that either now or in deliberations.
Okay, I think that would be appropriate to hear it in deliberations.
Okay.
We understand it.
Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to close this? We close?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah, I actually have one more question.
sure. Go ahead, Frank.
So when does the issue of the construction of the building,
Frank, your mic's not on.
pardon?
Your mic's not on.
I'm sorry. When does the issue of the construction of the building come before us?
It won't. It's a zoning permit. Single family homes on their own lots are only subject to administrative review.
So isn't the point well taken about the corner, that the incursion upon the tree preservation plan?
I would encourage you to have faith in your professional planning and zoning staff.
I have all the faith in the world. Thank you for your response.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to close.
Make a motion, we close site plan application ST 2303.
Second,
Second,
thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of closing SP 22020, say aye. Oh,
Aye.
I'm sorry. I think I had the wrong number. SD 2303. Say aye.
aye.
Chair votes aye. Any opposed? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 7 on the agenda. Continued site plan application SB 22020 of Nagley and Chase Construction to construct a single-story 21,709.90 square foot office building, creating 2,160 square feet of outdoor storage and associated site improvements at 39 Bowden Street. Dave Marshall, you're back.
Correct.
I would just explain that what we have in front of us is a draft decision written by staff. And as soon as I can find it. So I think what we'll do is swear Dave in for this one and then look at any of the comments in the proposed decision, findings of facts and decisions, and then take it from there. So raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, let's.
Dawn,
Yes.
I'm recused from this item.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Are there any other disclosures or recusals? Okay. And I think there's only, if I recall, one comment.
I think Marla said that. That was addressed.
Right, so
Okay.
the packet talks about how that the first page of the packet, there's a cover memo talking about how this has been continued since June of last year and wondering if we are going to get to a conclusion. I mentioned to the board as we were walking into this meeting, the applicant has done significant work over the past few days, and it sounds like we are getting to a conclusion.
Dave is very lucky that you did, or else you'd be getting a severe hand slapping.
I read that already.
Yep.
So in terms of what is required, are we all set?
Yep, I have heard from the city stormwater department that they have made the changes necessary to address the comments. We have that plan. I did a little side by side myself earlier today. The changes to the plan involve a change in the configuration of the subsurface stormwater system and some minor tweaks to grading. I don't think that a layperson would notice the grading changes unless you think otherwise, Dave.
No, in this particular case, things that have been integrated into the plan as an additional filter. It required that we do some grade changing on the parking lot on the west side, and north being straight up on this particular plan to accommodate and make sure there is adequate cover over those particular storm chambers. And then the other thing on the south side, that south entryway, because of the grading and the need to basically bring the site up, there is going to be a certain amount of that particular entryway that drained back towards the street without any treatment. And what we're doing in this particular case is actually doing what they call mass balancing, where you take a portion of existing pavement that's not being treated and collect it, treat it, so that in the mass balancing of the overall project, that what you're proposing as far as new impervious surfaces is being mitigated with a stormwater management plan. So the latest challenge or change, I should say, is up off of the easterly entryway off of Bowden Street, where we're now collecting a portion of Bowden Street stormwater runoff and bringing that into the stormwater chamber for treatment and eventually through the filter before it's discharged back into the receiving waters. So we now have a project that has been reviewed. I understand there are 2 small conditions that the stormwater utility recommended to be included, and we're amenable to those.
Okay. Oh, I should probably note those conditions for the record then. Email from Monica. Okay. The conditions are to update the EPSC plan to include the new layout with the catch basin that Dave mentioned has been added, and then change the notes on the EPSC plan to show that they'll need a construction entrance and need to sweep the street as necessary.
Any questions from the board? Sounds like we've got all the information that we need, and we can ask if there's any public comment. Is there any public comment from the audience or online? No? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the hearing.
Make a motion that we close site plan application ST 2220 at 39 Bowden Street.
Thank you, Mark. Do I have a second?
Doug?
Thanks. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? No, the motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Okay. Okay. Number 8 on the agenda. Continued remanded master plan application MP 2102A of Beta Air LLC for a plan unit development on 5 lots developed with a quarry, a mixed commercial building, a warehouse, a contractor yard, and an RV sales service and repair facility. The master plan includes combining the 5 lots, resulting in 1 lot of 747.92 acres and consists of 344,000 square feet of manufacturing and office building, a 37,800 square foot office and retail building, a 15,600 square foot commercial building, and an 85,000 square foot flight instruction and airport use building on 40.43 acres of the resulting airport lot at 3070 Williston Road. Any recusals? Stephanie is still recused, I believe. Anyone else? Disclosures or recusals? Okay. Who is here for the applicant?
Hi, Art Klugo, Beta Technologies.
Hi, Art.
Chris Gendron with Stantec.
And Jeff Hudson, Wagner Hudson.
Okay.
landscape architect.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you. So on a continued, do we need to swear people in again?
I don't know if they were all sworn in before. It doesn't hurt anything to do it again.
Okay, raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
Thank you. Okay, let me see. This is a fairly, okay. This is kind of complicated. So we did discuss this project in deliberations earlier tonight. So what I would suggest we do is give you feedback from our and decisions from our deliberation, and then go back to the comments that we kind of put a pin in at the last meeting.
Okay.
So the first issue is the issue of the management plan. There was some question about whether you were prepared to do that and commit to that. And our decision during deliberations is we must have a management plan. And there needs to be a responsible party who can speak to the entities responsible for the master plan. Do you have a question, Art?
I do. I'm curious as to what that last part means so that we can provide the information that the board is requesting.
I'm looking at the LDR 15B05A7 and quote defines a proposed management plan, quote, defines a management structure for the duration of the master plan that supports long-term project viability through project build-out.
All right. I'm not going to pretend to you that this is black and white or easy to digest. All right. We struggle with it as well, but I don't think it's totally inscrutable. I've been thinking about it myself. I think your argument, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is essentially, look, these permits run with the plan. Once we cut loose a parcel, responsibility falls to the new owner of that parcel to do his part. I think there are two things that are involved in assuming overall management responsibility for execution of the master plan. One is that impresses upon the manager the necessity of including that compliance explicitly in whatever the documents of conveyance, whatever the document of conveyance is, with a remedy in that person who is ultimately responsible under the master plan. If you see what I mean? In other words, you can't just cut it loose. We'll come back on the person. This is at least seems coherent to me. That's all I'm saying. We'll come back because of what the LDR says. You put in a management plan. We go to see the person who is named in the management plan as the ultimately responsible person. Now, arguably, that could be a position, the CEO of Beta. I don't know, whoever it is. If that person changes, then the identity changes according to the role, I would imagine. But it's one thing to say we can pursue anybody who's responsible, who owns the lot. But the LDR was going further. It wants a single individual who's got overall responsibility, which can be managed in the contractual relationship between the grantor and the grantee of the conveyed parcel. So you say it's not only subject to all the requirements of the management plan, but if you violate those, the person with the overall responsibility, have a remedy against you, just as does the enforcement body. I'm trying to make something coherent that isn't crystal clear on its face. Do you at least understand what I'm saying? Right?
Understand and appreciate it as well, Frank. and maybe what wasn't clear in the presentation a couple of weeks ago, is that currently Beta Technologies, because the LDRs say to include all principals or entities. So we can go down the entity route here, which makes it, I think, the conversation easier. Beta Technologies is responsible for design, construction, permitting, financing, execution of the master plan as we sit here today. We have no problems taking that responsibility on. We're the ones that are putting forth the master plan. The challenge that came out of the previous conversation was that it appeared that the board was stating that the master plan had to be executed in its entirety as it is currently conceived, and that if it is not, then the board reserves the right to then pursue the entity, in this case, Beta Technologies, if the master plan is not completed in as it's currently conceived and before the board. And as we know, we're allowed to amend a master plan. The entity could be sold and somebody could come back and finish the master plan, or may come before the board because the master plan would run with the entity, in that case, whoever XYZ company, and that just by the nature of an amendment, the master plan in and of itself is somewhat discretionary, because
Is somewhat what?
discretionary in that the way either the phases roll out or the phases may be adjusted in the future. And so I think the confusion for us wasn't that we weren't willing to say, hey, Beta Technologies owns financing, design, construction, permitting, execution of the master plan today. We're happy to say that, whether it's in writing or here tonight in testimony. What was less clear was what the board was actually seeking beyond that, in the event that there is a change in entity or there is a change in the vision,
Well,
something to that effect.
nothing prevents you from seeking to amend the master plan at the same time. At the time you sell.
Well, part of what happens with a master plan, right, is in my old world, in the development world, there are really three types of developers. One, there are transactional developers. They buy a piece of property, they manage that property, usually a building. There are those that are the visionaries and come up with the master plan and then will entitle the property. They'll take the raw dirt, they'll go through the whole permitting process, they'll entitle it, and they'll sell it to somebody that is transactional, that doesn't want to deal with the permitting process. And then there are those developers that combine both halves, and they'll see it from soup to nuts. In this case, what the role that Beta is playing, we're actually playing that third party right now. We're both the visionary. We're moving through the entitlement process right now, and have been for quite some time with the help of the board. And we're executing on that, in that we have two buildings on the master plan, plus the majority of the infrastructure in construction right now out in the field. Now, that doesn't mean that sometime in the future that we may choose to act as that first type of developer, or the airport may come and say, as the landowner, hey, we want to partner, or we have somebody that's interested in this parcel. Is that something that Beta is willing to help out with? Those opportunities should be able to exist. It was somewhat confusing in the way the conversation went at the last hearing, as it seemed like the board did not want that traditional development arrangement to exist that would allow the master plan to be fully built out, either with Beta, as we currently sit today, or in the seat of some other developer or entity.
Look, I think the spirit of the thing, as far as I can divine it, again, I'm not the draftsman, and maybe I wouldn't have written it, we're trying to apply it in a way that's coherent. But as best I can divine the spirit, it's that whenever that parceling out function occurs, that there still be a coherent, responsible party for executing the plan. That's all. It doesn't mean you can't sell off a piece. It does mean we need to know who we can speak to who we can address to coordinate the overall plan at the time you sell it off. Now, I go back to my first example, and you tell me why it doesn't. Tell me where it's falling short. The buyer of parcel X, I'm not even talking particularly to your plan, triggers a requirement that a road be built. For example, we should be able to go either to the buyer of parcel X, right? Or to the person, the entity that's been designated as the responsible entity under the master plan and say, let's see the road. And the contractual relationships need to have been worked out between the original master planner and its grantee, so that the master planner has the ability to compel the grantee to do whatever piece of that next step is the grantee's obligation, while the master planner is still answerable directly to the board for completing whatever the other piece is, such as the rest of a road. You follow me here?
Yes, there's a clawback, a perceived clawback in the way that it was just described, right? In that typically when a transaction happens, the responsibilities for executing the remaining portions of the master plan fall to whoever bought it, lock, stock, and barrel.
Listen, I get it completely, but we're stuck with what the LDRs say, you know?
Right. But
And they are giving us the claw. They are telling, the city has said, we want a clawback to keep it crude.
That's not what the
simple.
but that's not what the language says, though. That's like, we're more than happy to again, put it in writing, you know, and with testimony tonight. Beta is responsible for the master plan as it sits before the board. Design, construction, permitting, financing, project management, soup to nuts.
Yeah.
We're also responsible to the landowner to pay rent on the land that we're building on. As part of the master plan, which the board had previously approved, we're putting in infrastructure to support future development. We're improving raw land by putting in Da Vinci Drive. We've got sidewalks, bike paths, stormwater, sewer, traffic light infrastructure. We're not putting the traffic light in because that's a VTDOT. That's in their world, but we can widen the Williston Road. We can put the conduits in to support that. The infrastructure, that part of the project is Beta's responsibility. It has been approved by the board under a separate application and is currently in construction. So the requirements here in the LDR don't ask the applicant ourselves to prescribe how the change in ownership would function.
But you don't have to prescribe it to us. You need to prescribe it to your grantee so that you can remain answerable to us.
And we're more than happy to say, along with Beta is responsible for the things that we just outlined, that any condition of a transfer of ownership of the master plan would encumber the person that purchases it with the decision, findings of fact and decisions as demonstrated by the permit that we'll receive.
Jointly and severally with Beta. No,
Absolutely not, but I appreciate
Yeah, but your mic's
the
not
try
on.
there.
It isn't.
Oh,
I guess one question, and this is something we touched upon in deliberations, that this condition could be sort of like an organic condition that evolves over time. Could that evolution also include the fact that, let's just say, you know, they proceed as like condition or number 3, you know, where you're developing, improving and transactioning some of the parcels, could there be a condition or could it be something where as they transact one of the parcels in the master plan to another entity to develop it, could that document be updated? Because yes, I agree. Normally it's just, it goes with the land and whoever buys it, then those conditions get encumbered by the person that buys it. But I think what Frank's trying to describe in the way we're understanding it as a board is that the LDRs have taken it another step further. Almost simplified or removed the notion of it follows the land, but says whoever owns the land, there has to be some sort of document that gives the city ability to contact that person.
And you know, some latitude by the board here is welcome. And I think you recognize the challenge that we're all in, and that we're the first ones out of the gate. We have this untested regulation. We have no guidance other than the words on the page. We don't have any examples to try to
So I
modify
asked
it.
Paul to pull up the language, and if
Yeah.
you scroll down, there's a second part of the management plan, but keep what you have, just scroll down a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a two-part.
And Frank, maybe this falls into your court, but it feels a little bit like what I'm hearing is when in a subdivision, when you have a deed, somebody buys that property.
Yep.
There's the HOA documents that flow with the deed that then go to the owner of that property.
Right.
If that property is sold, they don't get to push off the HOA documents and the requirements that are outlined in that. Those flow with that piece of property.
Yeah, I think everybody up here gets that, what I've been saying to you, and that you either I haven't said clearly or you in your gut seriously are resisting.
No, we want to listen. We want to get to yes. Like
Is
that's the goal tonight, right? Is to
Is
get to
that-
yes or
Yes,
close.
of course, the obligations run with the land. The permitted obligations run with the land to the new owner. What we think the LDRs are saying is that, but they don't leave the person who came in and who succeeded in acquiring the master plan permit, that person remains responsible.
Right. So
And what I'm suggesting to you is the solution to that is that it's not written here, but the practical solution to that is that you make sure that that your grantee is answerable. It's not merely passive. Okay, the problem is now yours. You know, the permits run with the land. You have to obey the conditions, but that Beta remains directly able. It retains an umbilical cord to its grantee. In other words, it says not only do these conditions run with the land, right, but we, Beta, in addition to the city, are entitled to enforce them directly against you. We have a private right of action against you to compel you, grantee, to
for a third party that may not implement what they bought.
Right.
Is what you're asking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because then, you know, our life is simplified.
So if we
Again,
take-
this was not my plan, Art. I'm just.
No, I get it. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. I
So
do.
we come then to Beta or Beta's successor. Now, if Beta sells everything it's got, then that person, you know, Gamma comes in to replace Beta. Gamma then becomes as fully responsible for the total master plan as Beta does. But as long as Beta is there, it's responsible. In other words, we could envision maybe something in the agreement that says as much. So long as Beta is there, it's the responsible manager. And we will come to Beta to say, you know, Charlie over here to whom you sold parcel B is not complying, fix it. And then it's on Beta to go to Charlie and say, fix it. Under our private right to compel you to fix it so that we can comply with our obligation to the city under the master plan.
Right. So if we look at bullet point number 1, and I
I'm
appreciate
not sure what
the
you're looking at.
indulgence. I'm looking at 15.B.04J, the management plan. The actual LDR section has 2 bullet points that identify what is required to complete that. And bullet point 1, it's about 5 lines. It asks for a narrative description of the proposed management structure responsible for the project development to include all principals or entities with direct control over responsibility for the financing, permitting, construction, and completion of development under the master plan, semicolon. So to respond to that first part, to complete that first part, Beta Technologies is responsible for financing, permitting, constructing, and completing the development under the master plan. So we would feel like we've closed, as staff says, we've met that criterion.
Yep.
Now we go to part 2, and following project completion for long-term ownership, management, operation, and maintenance of the capital and community assets. So who is responsible for long-term ownership, management, operation, and maintenance of the capital and community assets? Beta is, once we complete it, we are responsible for the capital assets there. And I was I split it, the capital assets and community assets up in the write-up that was submitted, because the roadway, the airport has responsibility for the roadway, but we've got responsibility for the grounds and everything else going forward. So it would feel, when we take those 2 pieces and just split them up and answer them like that independently, that we've met the criterion as outlined here. And that criterion doesn't ask for Beta to commit to taking on the encumbrance or liability of a third party down the road that we have no way of managing.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on something. So, and the board may get upset. In deliberation, one of the words that I thought was important was the word proposed, which I think gets to the point you're making. So I am personally not cool with requiring a company to be responsible forever and ever for something that they've sold. That's where I'm coming in on this, just so you know. I don't find that to be an American principle of capitalism, so I'm not good with that idea. I am okay with you proposing for the long term, with a caveat that if we have sold or whatever, in that selling of it, we will make a requirement that they will pay attention to the rules that we agree to in the master plan, et cetera, but not that you would be the person we'd point to forever and ever until the end of time. Just so you're aware, that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And that's where I think that word proposed is very important. It's a proposed, which means you proposed it, things changed, we're changing it.
Right. And if the board in this narrative that responds to these points asked Beta to reinforce, there's a legal term for it, I see it all the time, not coming to my mind right now, to simply say that the Beta understands that it will convey a copy of the master plan conditions, the findings of fact, and the decision to somebody in the future, we're more than happy to do that, because that's what should happen anyways, right?
And that was my understanding of our conversation, to be honest.
Dawn, can I interject for a second? Dawn?
Sure, please.
So I think you're largely all saying the same thing, but let me just give a sort of a simple example. If this were a residential subdivision, there would be a homeowners association established. The homeowners association would have certain responsibilities forever into the future about if there's a private sidewalk, who's maintaining that, if there's a stormwater pond that isn't given to the city, or a pump station, who's going to maintain that? That's a big chunk of what this is. If there are common elements, who's taking care of them? Instead of, you're talking about conveying a lot, but what if there were 9 lots separately conveyed?
There's a
different
difference
entities.
between an HOA and a corporation, which is essentially a human being, right? It's a legal entity.
Well, it says a management structure
Right,
and ownership and responsibility.
right. Which in the event of a corporate ownership versus an HOA is supported by by the community that that it governs, which means it will always have the support that it needs, but a business may go out of business. So there's a problem there with that thinking, or comparing them to an HOA. I don't think they are an HOA. They may not exist as such in the future.
But let's say this was something where in this application or a different one, they decided to sell off multiple lots. There still may be common elements amongst them. In some way, there's a
true.
responsible entity
Yep.
to maintain those common elements. Or insofar as the city's concerned, and
I
there
think we
could
agree
be
with all of that.
circumstances where somebody, an entity 5 years from now comes in to amend the master plan. Can that entity speak on behalf of the master plan, or can they only speak for the one parcel that they now own? That's what this is trying to get at, is the ability to speak to the master plan. Or I'll give a third example, which I think you've already covered largely here, where a lot is sold and there's a trigger point in the master plan that says a traffic study needs to be done or an intersection needs to be built, making sure that it's clear that whatever structure is set up, it's clear that the city can compel at that time that triggering action to take place.
So what's interesting about this, and there's some good points to unpack in that, Paul. What's interesting about this is it highlighted probably something that I have not done a good job reinforcing, and that is that Beta is building the infrastructure on behalf of the landowner. We don't actually own the infrastructure. We're acting as a developer. So what you're talking about runs primarily through the landowner and not Beta as the entity. We own the building that sits on top of the property and are leasing the property from the landowner. And then on behalf of them, installing the roadway, the bike paths, the sidewalks, the sewer, the storm.
So as a minor example, in 7 years' time, when the first pothole arrives on this road, who's responsible to repairing and maintaining it? That's part of what this is trying to get to.
Right. And so what happens sometimes in some municipalities, and this may be helpful in terms of a modification to the language, is you have a separate agreement, which is a maintenance and use agreement between public and private entities. It's not normally part of a private development, which this is. We're building a private road, right? This road's not being conveyed to the city. It's remaining airport property. So a little bit of the pothole issue, I understand where you're at with that. It's still a private road, and the maintenance falls through to the landowner until such time as it may be determined beneficial, and there's some negotiations between the landowner and the city that you want that as a city road. But there are maintenance and use agreements, and if there was a condition of the permit, if we could close tonight, we're happy to submit a maintenance and use document plan with support from the airport, if that's something that they would like to do prior to our certificate of occupancy.
May I just ask a question? I mean, this has gone on and I know this is a very complex issue. I'm having a hard time grasping all of it. Can somebody please explain to me what is the difference between what we want and what they're saying they're willing to give? Pretend I'm a reporter and dumb it down for me because I'm a little lost in all this and I'm having a hard time understanding where the gap is.
Maybe
My
I
am
perspective-
too.
My perspective is that if we go like this and look at the words on the paper and what they said they're willing to say, we're done. But then we're getting into this conversation about the future and responsibility and who can we compel to do certain, and that's a whole nother thing.
Put the words back up again, would you, Mark? Can you put them up on the big screen?
'Cause I just
Thanks,
see,
John. Yeah. And I'm glad you're here.
Oh, I'm just as confused. Sorry.
What do you do with clearly identifies proposed ownership and responsibilities for the long-term management, maintenance, and operation of capital and community assets, including any, just that? How are we?
where
doing?
are you?
How has he provided for that?
Clearly identifies.
See,
Oh, see.
I mean, are you
C,
saying or that
7C.
C is the proposed ownership and responsibilities for long-term management, maintenance and operation is the responsibility of the airport? Is that the entity that's the answer to C? And then the answer to the entity for A and B is Beta?
Well,
Does that get to the answer that you're willing to live with and that the board can live with?
Again,
Say that again.
my response is the word proposed. As long as they propose it, it's done. Doesn't mean it doesn't change. It gets, I mean, it's a proposed ownership and life changes. I mean, that's the nature of business.
Well, that's fair.
Right,
But
and
can you propose, we propose that Beta will be responsible.
For A and B. And I
And
think
C-
what I
and-
hear you saying is that
and
the
C.
airport's
And see,
responsible
for
for
so long
C.
as we're in business and own it and blah, blah, blah.
yeah, which is where the write-up, our response to that does support what you're saying there. Yes.
So I'm sorry, Beta is going to be responsible for long-term management, maintenance and operation of the entire project? I thought you were
What we
saying
would
that.
Beta
do-
proposes that as proposed, the proposed ownership and responsibilities for the long-term management, maintenance and operation of capital community assets, including any proposed dedications of land, facilities and infrastructure to the city lies with Beta.
To the
End of
extent Beta-
sentence.
Or to the extent, I would say, to the extent Beta is an operational entity who owns blah, blah, blah.
It
So-
doesn't have to say that because if it ceases to be an operational entity, then it ceases to be one.
Right.
It said lies with Beta. Now, actually, there's a wrinkle in here that I haven't considered all the applications of. I forgot this was a ground lease.
We need a wrinkle.
So which complicate, I mean, Beta is not in a position to sell off parcels, or is it? No.
We're not.
So this is going to remain a unified parcel of land unless the airport comes in and wants to subdivide it in some fashion. Is that right?
Yes, unless there's a subdivision plan that's submitted for review and approval to the
Is-
DRB.
Is
So
the
that's
air-
why I'm confused about how Beta can be responsible for C.
Well, except for the capital, operation of capital, they're the capital assets, but community assets are the airport assets.
That-
Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it can be more than one
right.
entity.
So
You can say
it's-
Beta is responsible for capital assets and airport's
Airports.
responsible for community assets. Is that something that you can live with?
Yeah, and that's pretty much what we wrote in
Good.
what we submitted
Next.
originally.
It sounds like we've
Okay.
cleared up.
All right.
Beta is going to be AB, and under C, you're going to define it as betas for capital, airports for community. Good.
So we're there.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
John, you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Staff, let's
Mhm.
All right.
kill
Good.
this dead horse and
Let's,
move on
let's move on
to the other 15 comments.
The other issue we discussed during deliberation is why does it need to be a PUD? And the answer is because the project was already approved as a PUD in SD 2128. That was our thinking.
Okay.
And then,
I think fundamentally, as we discussed last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
It doesn't change what we're doing, so we're happy.
are we good?
Yes. move
Okay.
on.
Number 3. This is about whether the green and the red phases should be combined into one phase. I think that we feel very strongly that we want them combined. And that's our decision.
Could you share some of the deliberation behind that? Because it feels like based on, if we use the residential model, and one of those drawings that we looked at earlier on the previous application, it's a little bit like saying, combine parcel 7 and 9 into one parcel.
Well, so there's a difference between combining things into a phase and combining the buildings into one zoning permit.
Yes, but by doing that, you're encumbering our ability currently as the developer to move out on the project in a way that recognizes what the business needs are.
What it encumbers is it would mean that the elements of the project that are encompassed within those 2 phases are under discussion at such time as a building is proposed in either of those 2 pieces. So, if we're talking about, for instance, closing Valley Road, the board may want to say, okay, you're now proposing the building in the green phase. Does your traffic study warrant closing Valley Road now? And just have that be available for discussion. If it is not warranted, the board is not in the habit of just arbitrarily including things, but if it's not in that phase, it's not even on the table to be evaluated. Is that an accurate summary?
That creates a real challenge in terms of trying to close tonight, because we don't own the building that is in the red phase. That is an owned and operated building, and there are tenants with existing leases through 2030. Okay. The way that the infrastructure is set up is that the infrastructure is in place, as we described earlier, for either of those parcels to happen independently, and for, if needed, depending on the orientation and the design of those parcels, the infrastructure also exists in Williston Road. So there's flexibility in terms of how those two properties are built out. Last conversation, I felt like Frank was headed down the right path, which was the board, or the path that I thought you would look at, which is the idea that, are there elements in either the red or green phase that the board considered important and might be a condition to executing on one of those phases? Those parcels are completely independent of each other, with the infrastructure being put in the blue phase. So it's unclear why those parcels would be consolidated. And again, we don't have the latitude to dictate what happens on that red parcel. There's an existing business or existing building with many businesses in it that have leases that are long-term.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Is there any, I think one concern I had when I was just taking a look at this is any triggers of infrastructure or circulation in the red phase that's not in the blue phase that would affect the overall project if the red phase isn't triggered at any point in time in the near or long-term future.
Did you mean green phase? You said blue phase.
No, the blue
You
phase.
said red phase, didn't you, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
yes. By tying the two together, what I'm saying is if the red phase is never implemented, is there any circulation or triggers for infrastructure that don't get done? It's one thing to live without the buildings. It's another, is there any infrastructure, circulation, roadways or anything like that that's in the red phase that are detrimental to the project long-term if the buildings and a red phase don't get built out?
There's nothing detrimental to the project in that red phase. It's meant to be independent. There is some additional parking that's provided in the red phase should Beta and the airport identify a time and a way to replace that building.
Right.
Well, the red phase includes the signal and closure of Valley Road as well, yeah? So to answer Mark's question directly, what infrastructure is included in the red phase? It includes some parking, it includes the signal, and it includes the closure of Valley Road.
That infrastructure is there, but it's triggered by the additional parking that would get built. That additional parking is what triggers the need.
Right, so those pieces of infrastructure are in the red phase.
They are, but they're not. If the red phase doesn't get built, the project isn't negatively impacted by not building the red phase.
Is the Valley Road accessible to the main Beta parking lot employees?
It is not. In fact, there was a request from the board previously to make that a one-way in. So you've got to come in. You can't go out that, and it was done to reorient traffic around the site. That was a condition of the site plan, that application that was approved, that we're under construction with right now.
So where are we with this? We would like you to combine the red phase and the green phase.
Well, is there an avenue where we can look at those infrastructure pieces in the green phase and I think potentially we could write that into a conditional decision, and would you be amenable to that?
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that for the board's benefit. There's no additional infrastructure in the green phase. All the infrastructure required to support the green phase is being built right now in the blue phase.
That's what I meant by the blue phase.
So the green phase is, there's nothing that
Right, there's not infrastructure in the green phase, there is infrastructure in the red phase.
Right, and that infrastructure only needs to be put in place if the red phase is constructed. It does not negatively impact any of the work that's going on right now.
So I'm seeing in the plans, and Paul, if you could pull up, it looks like page 60 of the packet. There is a road closure that would occur with construction of the red phase from Valley Road. Right?
That is correct. If the commercial building is built and the existing building is demolished, Valley Drive would be closed and access to the site, including parking for the potential possible commercial building, would be as shown on the plan via Da Vinci Drive. You come in Da Vinci Drive, you'd make a left turn into the parking lot. That parking area services the that future commercial building.
Right, and so then Paul's gonna pull up a plan that shows how it exists before the red phase.
Yeah.
So as it exists before the red phase, that Valley Road continues to exist.
Yes,
You
it's
can see
two.
that that's a one-way connection up at the top, but it still exists.
That's correct.
Yep.
Yep. And all the traffic studies, all of the due diligence that was required to get to that approved plan right there aligns with what we've just been talking about. We don't need the traffic light. That's a VDOT, VTDOT, Vermont, whatever, requirements. So it's unclear.
So when, let's just say the red phase never gets done. Mirabelle's building, we call it Mirabelle's building central,
Yeah.
stays as is. But Valley Road becomes a one-way in only. So if you go to Mirabelle's, you have to go through the parking lot in Da Vinci Drive to leave.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you're going to any of the businesses on 3060, what was approved is it's two-way up to Mirabelle. So you can come in Mirabelle's via Valley, you can go out Mirabelle's via Valley, and you can get to Vermont MRI. There's some other buildings that there's a pass through there. If you want to, what the board didn't want to happen was all the cars in the beta lot to be able to go out, and we didn't want that either. To be able to go out and short circuit, either exiting on Williston Road or exiting further up on Eagle Drive. We did not want that short circuit to happen there along Valley Drive. So that's why you see the one-way into Da Vinci Drive only at that head.
But Beta employees can still come through Valley Drive and go into the parking lot.
No, it's the other way.
It's one way in, correct? Up at the Beta parking lot.
It's one way in, Chris.
So right, so employees.
Yeah, they
right,
could,
yeah.
Mark. You're absolutely correct. If somebody wanted to stop and grab a pastry and didn't want to park and go walk to get their pastry, that could fundamentally happen. Practically, there's no reason for it to happen. And listen,
Why would it be objectionable if it did?
I'm just wondering about the additional traffic through Valley Road for all the employees at Beta that would be using a road that's not designed for that much traffic. That would be my question. It's like all the people, and I'm looking at myself, that go through, the cut through at the hotel behind Barnes and Noble to get out to Williston Road, hotel traffic, saying this on, well, we're not recorded. Good.
we'll continue to do what we've always done, and that is, I think I'm okay saying this. There is a philosophy in the organization. I'll try to clean it up for the benefit of the board. Don't raise buttholes. Don't be a butthole, don't hire buttholes.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the fundamental principle. So if we have Beta employees, team members that are doing that and it's negatively impacting the business, as we've been in front of the board and any of the meetings in the community, we've shared, we are part of the community. We do not want to be the ones creating problems in the community.
Okay.
We're here to help. We're investing a lot of money in this building to make a fantastic place for people to come, not just the building, but the site plan. It was very thoughtful. It took a long time to get here. We've had great partners, including the DRB, the planning staff, and others to get to this point. We have no interest in being a bad community member. And if we need to take and have some conversations internally on our Slack channels, which are very free flowing and verbose, we're more than happy to do that to make sure that whatever complaints may arise are addressed.
I think that's fine as long as you're in operation, but if you are sold to somebody else who doesn't share that philosophy, then the traffic issue for getting pastries might.
Well, is Valley, it's Valley Road we're talking about?
Yes.
I
Is it a
think
city street?
we're
Is it-
asking to make a decision, right? Here, this is not asking for the board to say Valley Road has to be closed at the green phase. This is asking for the board to have the authority at such time as the green phase is proposed to evaluate whether that needs to be moved up.
Right. And so what we're saying is that, say we come in to you tomorrow. We submit an application tomorrow to planning and zoning staff, to Paul and Marlon, the team. And it gets on your docket in 2 months. And you say, you know what? We hear what Vermont DOT is saying, but we really want you to close Valley Drive. We can't do that because there are leases there. There are commercial legal obligations that we can't sidestep if we come in tomorrow with an application to put a child care center on the green parcel.
But if you come in 15 years from now to put a childcare facility on the green, or 10 years from now, because that would be the duration of the master plan, to put a facility on the childcare parcel and haven't done anything on the red phase, the board is proposing to combine their authority to review that at that time. They're not thinking about the 3 months from now possibility. We're thinking about, Beta's fully built out. There's maybe 1,000 employees instead of the 500 employees that were planned, and maybe that traffic situation has changed.
Who owns the Maribel's building?
The airport does.
The airport does. Okay.
Is there any outlet from Valley Road other than to the Beta parking lot?
No.
In other words, does the threat for increased traffic arise from any source other than Beta employees?
No.
So isn't it within the power of whoever controls traffic in the city to put up a sign that says no outlet?
And there was
That
signage
would-
requested as part of the application, the
That's
approval.
gotta
We
be-
have to put signage up at that head end.
Right.
Where the two come together, the one way and the two way.
Couldn't that serve as an adequate control? If it's. No?
I mean,
Do you always obey signs?
Huh?
Do you always obey signs?
I never use the hotel as a throughway.
Guys, I gotta just say, we are at time.
Yes.
We have a lot more to cover for Beta, and we have a lot more work to cover for other projects tonight. So I'm afraid we're gonna have to bring this to a close for now and reschedule to continue. Unless you want to continue this conversation and bump number 9, site plan application, could we do that and take their time?
Yes. Because for us to move forward with number 9, we have to close out number 8. So it
Okay.
seems appropriate that we
So
would.
can we move?
well, so let's finish conversation on this and
Okay.
then we'll just.
Okay,
move the next one. Yeah.
all right, so
I mean, is that really our only issue, overloading Valley Road, or do we want something else out of that?
For this comment, I believe that was the only issue. Well, no, that's not true, right? There's a signal warrant as well. If in 5 years from now, things have changed and Beta has twice as many employees, the board should have the authority to reevaluate the infrastructure improvements for the green and the red phase as part of the next application.
Well, I think there is already a condition in the permit that requires us to, if we have a change in our parking, we could, first of all, we can only park so many people on that cars in the spaces. Unless we were to go to an elevated deck in that area, which we have no interest in. I don't think the board has any interest in at this point. The number of parking spaces that you see there are at capacity, and those are what are considered in the traffic study. So there would be no additional traffic from Beta employees beyond what you see there.
So just taking what Marla's saying and what Quinn was saying, this is still the green-red phase combo or not. And if we somehow reserve the right to do a review, whether they're joined or not, it really addresses our primary concern for the long term, right? Is that what you were saying? Yeah.
Yeah, because the green phase does not add any more parking.
So
I mean, I don't want to play a what if game here, but I mean, I could imagine several scenarios in which there would be additional traffic that don't require additional parking. I mean, what if it becomes a 3-shift building? What if it be, whatever. So
Shift, so the parking
I
study,
don't want to go into the like what if scenarios. My point is I want the board to have the ability to reevaluate should it need to be reevaluated.
we're completely open to that. That happens with every application that comes in. The only point that I was going to make is that the traffic study, which has been submitted, which was part of the approvals, does contemplate shift work. And the way that the traffic study is done is during peak periods. Shift work is not peak periods. There would not be more traffic beyond what happens during the peak periods. That is the worst case scenario, and that includes all the parking that we currently have permitted.
And just to ask a question about that, if we were to build the green phase, we would redo our traffic study. I thought that was part of, that's a requirement of the master plan.
Right.
Why do we have to redo it? I mean, then let's say we build the red phase, we'd redo it for that one. You'd have a chance to chime in at both those phases. Why do they need to be combined?
Okay. Board.
Just, I
Go
don't
ahead.
know to address this, and I'm just, I think paraphrasing what Marla said earlier, infrastructure pieces currently belong with the red phase. We wouldn't have the ability to.
Sorry, just not to cut you off, but the signal lies at any point in time, not with the red phase. The signal could happen at the green phase, it could happen red phase. It doesn't, it's all tied to when VTrans says, put in a signal.
Right.
So like we had the conversation before, I think we're all saying very similar to the same thing. And I think it's just a matter of having a deliberation and crafting a condition.
Great. Okay. Now, this just brings us to the end of our discussion during deliberation. We still have all the other comments. And shall we get started on those?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think we did the heavy lift. My apologies. I think we did the heavy lifting right now. I think when we left the last meeting, we deferred those other items because they referenced the conversation that we just had.
Okay.
So yeah, let's, happy to follow your lead on that.
So Marla has summarized the comments and she, in those references, the comments in the staff report. I unfortunately deleted my annotated report from last meeting. So I would ask Paul if he could call up the comments on the screen, please. Comment number 1 pertains to the master plan submission requirements.
So we're just going to go to the staff report, comment number 1. Is that what you mean?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
That is on page 7, Paul.
Oh, I have it on page 4.
Oh, you're probably in last week's packet. This packet has an additional cover page.
Okay, all right. Okay. So let me read it. The staff has provided the below detailed review of submission requirements. In order to support this finding, staff recommends the board require the applicant to modify their submission as indicated below so that the submission can be considered a portion of the approved plan for the project. Thoughts about that?
We concur. We understand that whatever happens down below, if there's modifications that are required, happy to modify the plan either by condition or other.
Okay.
I think that's all that's saying is that, hey, we got to have a conversation. There may be some things that change. We just want to make sure we're on the same page and let you know that those changes will need to be incorporated. I think we're completely on board with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Given that we are due to stop right before 9:05, are there any issues we're going to have to continue this? I know that's not music to your ears, but are there any issues that you want to get our feedback on before we run out of time?
No, not specifically. The goal from our side tonight was to close the hearing.
Of course.
Understanding that we needed to get through 15 and 16. Those are really, really challenging. I think the balance of these comments or responses are going to flow from that.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to comment number 2. Staff recommends the board determine if this criterion is met based on the discussion, which I see glare, occurs in response to numbered staff comment number 13 below pertaining to building design.
This is a bit tough because it was 2 weeks ago that the building design was discussed, but does the board feel that the applicant's presentation provides adequate standards to guide the functional aesthetic integration of the phases?
Right. And as part of the conversation we didn't get to last week at the back end of that handout, which you have electronically, there were some material image boards that talked about the design aesthetic and that not supported, but were supplemental to the conversation we had about the vision for the master plan.
Okay, any questions about that? John, you look like you were going to ask a question.
I don't, it might be just me. I don't recall seeing the design.
Okay. Do we have that electronically? Could we see that, please?
Yes, but what's that? I'm sorry.
That would be the handout that you provided 2 weeks ago.
Oh, the handout.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I remember that.
And that was
Yeah.
given to Marty electronically.
Okay.
I'm good.
You're good then? Okay.
So the idea would be that those handout materials will be integrated into the decision. Okay,
Good.
got it.
Okay. Comment number 4.
Paul, can we get him back on the big screen?
Yep.
Poor Paul. Do this, Paul. Do that, Paul. Staff recommends the board determine if this criterion is met based on the discussion which occurs in response to numbered staff comment number 13 below pertaining to building design. This is about design standards.
And so we saw that as tying to comment number 2.
Okay,
And
I think you're right.
Mhm.
Okay. Good, next. Comment number 5 pertaining to responsibility for executing the master plan. I think we've probably hammered this
Beat that
one
is
to
pretty-
death.
That horse is dead.
Yeah, the horse is dead. Okay. Comment number 6 pertaining to vesting of the master plan. Board recommends the board give the opportunity to provide any additional testimony if they feel necessary. Otherwise, consider vesting in deliberations. Do you have anything to add that you want us to hear? Art?
I don't. I feel like we covered the phasing completely.
Okay.
and I'd
Okay.
say we're good there.
And discussion of PUD type on page 10. I think we've covered that in deliberations, haven't we?
And tonight, yeah.
Yes. Comment number 11 pertaining to compatibility between existing buildings to remain and proposed buildings. Anything to add about that, applicant?
No, I think that follows again the image boards that were submitted as supplemental material at the last.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We had 2 more to go. We're gonna make this. Comment number 15 pertaining to consolidation of the red. Oh, we've hammered that one out. Comment number 16 pertaining to responsibility for executing the master plan. I think that's the same conversation. So I think we are there for this agenda item, unless anyone has any questions. And we'll take a break and ask for public comment. Are there any members of the public who want to comment at this time? Okay, I don't think we do. So I would entertain a motion to close this hearing.
So move.
Thank you, Frank. Second,
Seconded.
thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of closing the hearing, say aye.
I
Opposed? Hearing none? Okay, good. So I think we need to vote to carry over site plan application SP 22056 to what date would that be, Marla?
Let's do that at the next meeting on the 21st.
Okay, good.
Plenty of time.
So I'm going to move that we review SP 22056 at our next meeting on the 21st of March. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good. We'll see you back here on the 21st.
Awesome. Thank you
On the
very much.
spring, we'll see you back here in the spring.
I love it. And
Ides of
daylight savings
March.
time this weekend. So
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's March 15th.
Is the Ides of March?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, but you got to get through the Ides to get there. So you can,
That's
cool.
it's still a valid comment.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for your patience. Do people want to take a 5-minute break? Okay, go for it.
Files reporting?
Yes, please. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Item number 10 on the agenda, preliminary and final plat application ST 2305.
Did you want to conclude our intermission with an announcement of?
Oh, I'm
election
sorry.
results
I'm
first?
sorry. Yes. We have some very exciting news.
Breaking news.
Breaking news, the election results from South Burlington, and I'm going to let Paul inform you of the results.
Hey, folks, election results as submitted by our city clerk. For the 3-year council term, Andrew Chalnick won. For the 2-year council term, Tyler Barnes won. Water Commissioner was unopposed. Dennis Lutz won. For the, and I don't know the first names, I apologize, on the school board, but on the school board 3-year term, McHenry was the winner over Hickey. On the 2-year term, it was very close. It appears that Companion won over Childs by
Oh, wow.
26 votes. For 2 years of a 3-year term, unopposed, Williams won. And then on the city, all of the articles passed, I guess is the simpler way to say all this. So the city budget, the Bartlett Bay wastewater treatment facility, the TIF, 2,300 to 940, so very substantial. The school articles all passed.
Okay.
Great.
That's what
Thank
we
you.
have.
Thank you for that breaking news. Okay. Preliminary and final plat application SD 2305 of Gary Bourne to create a general plan unit development by subdividing 3 existing lots into 3 new lots of 0.18 acres, lot 1, 0.14 acres, lot 2, and 1.06 acres, lot 3, and constructing a 3,350 square foot financial institution on Lot 1, a 6,480 square foot, 2-story mixed commercial and residential building on Lot 2, and a 3-story, 27-unit multifamily building on Lot 3 at 760 Shelburne Road. This, the applicant has chosen to combine preliminary and final plat application, which makes this a much longer discussion than otherwise would exist. So ask for your patience. And I think it's a foregone conclusion that we will need to continue this hearing to another night. We'll see what we can get through until just before 10 o'clock, and we'll see where we go. So who is here for the applicant, please?
Gary Bourne.
Thank you.
Lucy Thayer, landscape architect with Trudell Consulting Engineers, and we have some folks online as well.
Okay, and who are they?
Jen Desatel, engineer at Trudell Consulting Engineers.
Thank you.
Kelly Mejia, TPG Architecture.
What is your first name, please?
Kelly.
Ellie, thank you. Kelly, okay, thank you.
And there may be some other folks online that jump on, but also I forgot to mention Alan Spencer is here from Revenue Architects.
Okay. All right, would you all raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
I do.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And just keep in mind, if anyone else does testify, they'll need to be sworn in at that time.
Right. Of course. Do we have any recusals or disclosures?
Stephanie's out of this. Oh, there she is. Okay. John has a big head.
This is a long staff report, so let's just, let me ask you if you have any comments you want to make before we start just going through the comments.
No, I don't think so. There are some we would really like to get feedback on today. So if the time gets short, we'll identify those at that time and we
Okay.
can make sure to address those.
I was actually going to stop at about 20 till 10 and say, since we have to continue, are there any things you want feedback on tonight? So bear that in mind.
That sounds very good. Thank you.
Okay. Number one.
Do you want them to introduce the project at all, or?
Sure. Do you want to give like a 5-minute overview of the project?
Ooh, 5. That's very generous.
Oh, 3 minutes.
It's okay. I don't think I want to take 5 minutes to get into, hopefully you're all familiar with it.
I feel like we are, but
So I think one thing that would be really conducive to the discussion is we sent some renderings over.
Yep, we have those.
Yeah, but we didn't, they were a little late in the digital version, so we brought hard copies.
We have them.
Oh, you do have them? Can I pass them out as well if folks wanted to look at them? Is that okay? Sure. If I pass them to Stephanie, can you send down the line, please?
thank you.
It's been a while since we've been in, so just the short version is we've owned the properties, some of them for 40-something years. We've operated the shell directly in this time. The shell was built in the 50s, so it's always been a station. Our desire with this is to, in return for giving up the station and the auto repair in the back and the curb cuts and everything else, is to come up with a quality project that we intend to own at the end of the day. And we tried to address the issues that we had heard from the planning department is in terms of housing, so forth. So
Mhm. Okay.
that's how we got to where we are here.
So the first comment talks about the appearance of at least 2 stories and our requirement that, are those the results? Thank you.
Package. So you gotta.
Yes, we did. Thank you for your hard work. I bet you're glad today's behind you, almost. Oh, okay. Thanks, Donna. Thank you. So this issue is one that's pretty important to us. So let's talk about this issue.
Right. So we think that this is something of a gray area in the way that this can be interpreted. And so we would implore the board to kind of reference the 15C01, which gives the board authority to make exceptions for PUDs. And we think that this is an appropriate application of a modification of the standards if it is interpreted to be a requirement, which we're not fully clear that it is. If the board doesn't think that it is unclear and that it is a requirement, with that accommodation, we would suggest that in fact, not the full 2 stories is actually beneficial in this instance because it creates a stepped line of the buildings, right? Maybe Marla, could you go to the one that's from Queen City Parkway? Oh, I'm sorry, Paul was running that. So by having the stepped, there we go, the stepped facade, it actually creates a very nice streetscape appearance.
So this is from Shelburne Road.
That is looking east from like the Queen City Parkway.
Right.
Intersection.
Right, okay.
And you can see
To the left is the
Denny's.
180 there.
Yes.
So we think that it actually fits really well in this scenario. And I think that, Kelly can speak more specifically to this particular architecture. But what we would look for from the board is if you think this is a requirement or if you'd be amenable to accommodating what we've provided, which we think is a very nice building.
The proposed structure is 21 feet, 6 inches or so. It's not a small building. And the Chase people have reorientated the glazing to meet the glazing requirements. So it's not like they haven't worked with us on this as far as an R ask from them.
And
But I
the
think it
Chase building is the one.
is the building
the
in question.
corner.
It's the one on the corner, correct?
So from your perspective, looking at this, looking east, there's a gradual step up this way.
If you're facing east, yes, right, towards the, the buildings would rise towards the south. They would it would step down as you look towards the Swift Street side.
Okay.
And you can kind of see that where the building that is on the right that has the multicolors, the kind of blue, red, and gray color, that is the full 2 stories. Just to orient you, I didn't give you a project overview, but that building on the right is the mixed use building. So that is commercial on the first floor, 3 residential units on the top. The financial institution is on the left, and that's at the corner of the parcel. That's at the intersection of Swift and Shelburne.
Is there a drive-through there? Is there a drive-through there?
We have a drive up ATM, and that is
Behind the building from as we're looking at it.
But that's something we need to talk about because
yes,
as it turns out, that's not allowed. But anyways, we'll get to that. So Mark, you're our resident architect.
can
What
I
are your
weigh in?
thoughts?
The issue I have with the design of the Chase building is that it's a PUD. So you have 3 buildings on the site and it feels like one of them doesn't belong. You've got 2 buildings that have a very similar style of architecture, massing, and the Chase building feels like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 small cubes and doesn't sit at all with the other buildings. And as well as the fact that this is kind of like a cornerstone corner in South Burlington. And it's really a corner that I think lends itself to a true 2-story building. And I think it would fit a lot better with the other 3 buildings on the site, and it would pull the whole thing together. Right now, it feels fragmented and disjointed and disconnected from the other 2 buildings, and it distracts me from what's going on. And it might be 21 feet tall, but it reads like a 1-story building. And I just think that, especially the fact that it's a PUD with 2 other buildings on the site, I think you would be far better served to follow the pattern that you've established with those 2 other buildings.
Other thought? I actually agree, Mark. Are there any other thoughts about this?
I don't have an independent view. I would defer to the architect.
Okay.
I do have a question though about the buildings. It's something I didn't quite understand before. My fault, no doubt. This looks like This is 3 lots we're looking at?
Yeah, it's required to be 3 lots because of the current PUD regulations.
But they're party walls? I mean, there's the 0 lot line, is that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do the buildings adjoin? Are they-
No.
No.
There are 3 separate buildings on 3 separate lots.
Okay, so there's space between each of the.
Correct.
each of these buildings. I just can't see the spaces.
Yeah, that,
All right, show you, Frank.
So are you amenable to
There, Frank.
rethinking that the bank building and making it appear to be 2 stories?
I think, well, one point we did want to bring up is that the city did just pass a climate action plan, and that we do think that having a faux 2-story is somewhat antithetical to the climate action plan. So our hope would be that in order to have the most efficient building design and use of resources, that we wouldn't be required to have a full 2-story or faux 2-story. Regarding the architecture, that is in Kelly's wheelhouse. So I would request that she provide some feedback on what on the architecture specifically.
Kelly?
Yeah, so just to provide a little more background on how we established the design. While this is Chase standard, and I know that in the notes, the board is aware that there is a prototype here. We felt that it actually did relate to the other buildings, while making sure that it is understood from the customer point of view that it is the Chase Bank. We do have the tower elements that do relate back to the other buildings, where it's sort of pieced together with these vertical elements, as we see in the residential building behind. And we actually wanted to consider the view of those residential units. I know that as someone who lives in an apartment, I know it's nice to conserve those views and have those units available with the views, and not totally look out your window and see the adjacent building so close. So we thought that keeping that building a 1-story would help in that aspect. But we did want to note that we do have the prominent entrance, a very strong corner feature. And while Chase may consider, I cannot say if they will fully decide to do a full faux 2-story. We can definitely bring that to discussion with them and consider it. But that's part of the reason why we would encourage to keep the 1-story, to really just to help in that sense for the residential units. And so, they're not looking out at the adjacent building there.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
I would like to point out that in the staff notes that we received back, that staff feels or acknowledges that Shelburne Road is never going to be city center. It's never going to be a New England downtown, if I'm remembering it correctly. So where we've brought so much to it and to this corner, it seems like a relatively small ask. We passed on the energy savings. We went with the extra glazing. It is true that Chase and large quality national tenants do tend to stay with buildings that are part of their ID, part of their
Sure,
image.
the brand,
People
yeah.
don't bank the way they used to, but large commercial quality tenants have buildings that they like, whether it's a lesser tenant, a Walmart or something like that, or a quality tenant like Chase. And I think we were fortunate to attract them to this. And for them to not use the building they use for standard, it seems like a reach, especially given that staff acknowledges it's a 6-lane highway. It's one of the busiest in the state. To get to this point, we very, very intentionally, and I think staff would back us up on this, this project was brought here in this format specifically to work the process. What is it the city wants? They want those curb cuts gone. They want the gas station gone. They don't want us doing repairs. They didn't want us to park cars at the Pizza Hut before all this started. I mean, this project was to accommodate and to try to bring a really good looking fixture. I am sorry that you don't like the looks of it. We've looked at it and said, geez, it looks like a nice little village. The village is, we've obviously got to come up with a name for the building at some point. But I do think when you look at the graphics and stuff, I think this is a really good looking project. And when you come down Shelburne Road or up Shelburne Road or up Swift, I think we're all going to be very pleased with how this looks, especially if you took a camera and did a 360 in this area. And I think this fits well with what's gone on further down the road with some of the other quality projects that you've put through that are done and up, so you can see them in real life.
So I think we would really be looking for the board's direction as to what you think is appropriate here.
Okay. So go ahead, Mark.
Oh, one thing I just want to note, and it's not germane to, well, it is kind of germane to my previous comments about the building and all that, but we don't approve Chase. We approve a building. And tomorrow Chase could walk away and someone else comes in. So we're not, while if it works and if we can, then that's one thing, but we're not approving, Chase as a tenant for the building.
Oh, understood. We're
Yeah,
approving the
okay,
building, and that's all we're going to put
Yeah,
up is the
yeah,
building.
Okay.
Whether
got it.
they come or
Okay.
go is.
Sure. Yes.
So one of the suggestions that Marla or staff made was that we enter deliberations, because if this is a no starter, we should know that now.
So it's not a no starter for us. We're looking to know where the board is leaning. If it is a requirement, we would just like that to be clear. And our response is, if it is a requirement, we don't have an answer at this time.
I understand.
Because we're not the decision makers. That needs to go through a process. So we would like to continue the discussion and just have maybe some feedback as to how everyone's feeling.
So we can do, if the board would like a couple minutes to discuss it, we can just walk out of the room and go into a different room and have a quick deliberation and come back. And we can continue until 10 o'clock tonight. Or, that may be, if the board feels like they don't need to discuss it and can just provide that feedback right now on the fly, then you're also welcome to do so.
I'd like to ask a question first.
Sure.
I guess the back building is residents,
Yes, that's a multi-unit residential.
and there are residents on the bottom floor and the top floor.
Correct.
And so the top floor residents will be able to see out over the top of the building, but the bottom floor residents were going to be looking at the bank.
Yes, that's likely the case. There is a grade change across the site. So there's approximately 9 feet of grade change from the west to the east. It rises up Swift Street, as we know. But so there is it's a higher finished floor elevation in the multifamily. So their first floor is higher than the 2 front commercial buildings. But yes, it is
Oh, it's
anticipated.
a 3-story building.
Yes.
Okay. great.
Yeah. So the lower floors are likely not to have those long views.
John, this one gives
Which
us
happens,
the area. Gives
lot.
it freestanding.
For all first story buildings.
I think I would like, do we have to vote to go into deliberation? Okay. I think I would like us to deliberate a little.
Yeah.
To be able to give you some feedback and have a context for the rest of the review.
Absolutely.
Do you think, Paul, we could use the senior center, or are they likely still wrapping up in there?
I believe they're all done.
Okay. So we're gonna go walk over to the senior center. You want to leave your computer here and I can take mine?
Hang on a second, I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
Not meaning to be a harsh landlord or anything. It was easier for them to leave than it is for us.
Yeah, there's people online too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Forgot about you all.
Thanks, right.
Okay. So
I do
Paul,
think
you're
it
gonna
looks
leave
better
your
than the dentist.
Film going, or did you lose it? Okay, then. That's what I'm saying. You stay here, but
We had a brief deliberation session and now we're back meeting with the applicant. So who would like to convey what our thoughts are?
Well, I think we came to a conclusion. I think, it'd be a little bit like watching sausage made if we conveyed all of our thoughts.
That's true.
I think the conclusion we came to, I believe, was that we want to see a piece of the building, the bank building, those 4 blocks raised to 2 story. Well, we want to see a piece of the building raised to 2 stories, and we decided to defer the exact to leave the exact design up to you. We'd like you to propose something that
Understood.
increases a portion of the building to 2 stories.
Okay.
Or the appearance of.
Or the appearance of.
Right. So that it ties in better with the other 2 buildings.
Understood. We also heard your comment about the compatibility with the exterior elements. So that comment has also been noted. Thank you very much for that feedback.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next comment. I'm going to read this because I couldn't summarize it. Staff recommends the board ask the applicant how the proposed modification results in better compliance with the LDR, specifically how it results in a project that is equivalent or demonstrably superior in function, design, and quality to that required under the standard to be modified, or more efficient, compact, workable, and well-planned than the project would be if it were to fully comply with the dimensional standards.
Yes. So we think that
So
we.
this is about the front setback.
Yes.
Okay, carry on.
Yes, yes. So we think that the project does have all of those elements that make it equivalent or demonstratively superior in function, design, and quality for the, that required under the standard to be modified, or a more efficient, compact, walkable, and well-planned than the project would be otherwise. So we think there's a couple like really important points about why that setback is important and consistent with the surrounding area of the Shelburne Road corridor, or not inconsistent maybe. So it creates better connection between the PUD lots, having that setback. It facilitates the interconnectivity just with these lots and also with the Koto lot. We are able to have a more efficient use of space. So with this setback, we have better room to get into that underground garage. And by having an underground garage, it's a much more efficient use of the site because we have got parking underground the footprint of the building. So that's a much more efficient use of space. We also think that the additional 10 feet along the front setback could be considered as underutilized because you would be taking it out of the core project area and adding it to the front Shelburne roadside, and it would not be a usable space. In fact, we think it would have it would negatively impact and reduce the quality of the site amenities because that's really where we would have to take it out of. So that would be a direct impact on the folks using the site. We also think that having that front setback allows us to have a more effective transition of grades. Like I mentioned before, there's that 8 or 9 foot grade change from the Shelburne Road side to the east to the back of the site, the multifamily. So by having that reduced setback, we're able to transition the grades, step the buildings. We've created really beautiful landscape walls and planted walls so that helps this transition as well. And we think that it creates those high quality site amenity spaces, and it's quite attractive. And I guess the last thing I would point out is it's not dissimilar to other developments in this area. I think the City Lights building is really close. The motel across the street, granted, it's a different kind of building, but that's very close. And then there's some other ones. There's the New England Imported Rug Gallery. So there are examples of this type of setback in this corridor. So we do feel that it's appropriate and very beneficial to the project as a whole to create those goals for the PUD.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
It
Okay.
would be more, it would be more in line with like where the Denny's starts if we didn't allow. Is that what we're saying?
I think the Denny's might be a little bit farther back. So just for reference, those parking spots are 9 feet So it would be, you know, one of those, you kind of lop off a parking spot. I think the view just changed, Paul. If you could scroll it down just a tinge so we could see that scale reference for the parking.
Sorry, which way would you like me to go?
Just scroll it so we can see the parking on the south side of the Coto lot. Yeah, just to give a
yes.
little context of where that building would, where the car is parked. You'd kind of take that line and go north through the building, kind of chop it off there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's do a time check. It's 9:45. Are there any issues that have been identified in the staff report that you'd like to talk about tonight so you can prepare for the next time you come back?
Thank you for asking. Yes, there is one additional one we would like to discuss today. And that is 14 about the prohibited ATM.
Sorry, I didn't feel like I got a conclusion from the board.
I was
on the
gonna
10-foot
say, can we go
setback.
back to the 10-foot setback?
Sure.
And
Let's go
try to
back
get
to
some a conclusion on that. I think that
Right,
would be
so I
helpful
feel like you
because
heard from the applicant, but we didn't hear from the board. What does the board think?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
As am I.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
I think it does provide a better street frontage presence connection.
Okay.
May I pose one just quick question to the applicant on this?
It's-
How far from the existing sidewalk would there be to I guess, infrastructure that's difficult to move, like the staircase?
Can you ask that one? How far is it from the back of
Right, so let's
sidewalk?
say V-Trans wanted to widen the sidewalk there. They've got a couple of feet on where we're seeing the black dashed line there. But if it made sense to go any further and work with a property owner in the future, how much space is there between the property line and obstacles?
I think that we can, I don't have a scale rule for your digital version, but I think that a couple of feet before the stairs. So, you know, this seems like a hypothetical discussion about a potential V-Trans expansion that doesn't necessarily exist, but I appreciate the kind of comment, but there's not a lot of extra room were this to become a larger road. I think, is that what you're getting at, Paul?
It's just understanding the implications of having the building and the infrastructure close to the street, so.
right. And I think, Paul, we can answer that by saying the right of way is really wide here. You know, the Route 7 corridor, I think V-Trans has taken all they need for now. And I think they've, you know, taken a little bit additional from Gary over the years. So I think it's pretty safe to say that that line isn't moving very much. And I do think, circling back to Lucy's original point, that if we shift all the buildings back, it just makes the project worse. You know, the interior open space design, there's really a lot of time and effort put into that, and finding a way to make it nice for the people who will live at this property. And I think it would just be unfortunate to take that out of the limited amount of open space we have on the site.
Thanks,
Okay.
just wanted to have that confirmed.
Okay, so let's come back to the issue of the drive up ATM.
So do we want, I think it's probably pretty clear, staff has identified that it's prohibited. And the reason we want to talk about it is because our interpretation is that it's not prohibited, and that it should not be considered a drive-through. And we would look for the board's interpretation as if they concur with staff's reading that this is a drive-through.
What is it if it's not a drive-through? Is it a drive up?
So Paul's going to pull up the definition. So the definition of drive-through in the LDR, well, I guess if you can scroll up just a little bit, we can see the whole of item number 2. So this is item number 2 is a standard within all PUDs. New drive-through facilities are prohibited from locating within a PUD. So then we went to the definition of drive-through, and that's what's on the page under drive-through. So for
And that
staff,
is in the PDF. I mean, the
in the LDR.
LDRs. Thank
Yes.
you. It's getting late.
So the important part for staff here was while remaining in their vehicles. And then obviously receiving services or goods.
I think the contention that can be made on this, and this is a surprise to us, that this even came up at this late date, but that being said, there's no order window, there's no service window, there's no outdoor menu boards, there's no attendant, there's no connection to the bank excepting for electrical power underground to this ATM that's bolted to a concrete pad. This isn't an effort to compete with all the other banking institutions in the area who have regular conventional drive-throughs like the McDonald's and like the others, and like the banks where you can drive up and speak to a live person and so forth. This is a reach. What you're asking for is if we have people who are challenged, handicapped folks, the board has acknowledged that if we put it aside and make you get out of your car and walk over to it, that they're fine with that. And that's fine if you're not in a wheelchair, if it's not late at night. If you feel like no matter what, when you get your money out of your ATM, no one's going to take it away from you. I mean, I think this is a very small ask. We're not asking to put up a building. We're not asking to slab one on the back with an attendant in it. It's been in the process, in the project since before anything was presented. When we met with staff early on to lay out what was possible before we presented it to any potential tenants to try to shape the project to fit what the city wanted. And that was 2 years ago, Paul? 2 years plus? It was some time ago, and it's been in all the way through, and we understood it was just a drive-up ATM. That was the ask at the time. This became an issue last Wednesday afternoon, and then Thursday, we got the paperwork on it, Thursday afternoon on that this was an issue.
Are you suggesting when you say you interpret it as, I'm reading this sentence, new drive-through facilities are prohibited from locating within a PUD? Are you saying this quote, drive-up ATM is not a quote, drive-through facility? Is that the argument?
That's my perception of it.
That's
Unless
your-
we can get an attendant, a building, a window, menu boards, and all the components.
I'm sorry, I think I don't agree with you.
Okay.
By a lot.
And that's what we're looking to hear from you, is if you agree or disagree. And I think that if you disagree, the other piece we would like to point out is that 15C01 that gives the board the authority to modify the zoning regulations as part of the PUD review. So those are that's the discussion pieces we wanted to bring up with this ATM and get your feedback is if you think it is in fact prohibited and you would direct us to remove it, then we would take that feedback.
Other thoughts of board members?
I agree with Frank. I mean, I think that I agree that it's a drive-through facility that might not have a building, it might not have people attending it, but I think it's clearly an establishment or structure. The ATM is a structure which by design, physical facility, service, or by packaging encourages or permits customers to receive services. You're clearly receiving services, goods, or be entertained, but while remaining in their vehicles. So I think, it's clearly a drive-through. I would say that, and I also think because it's PUD, you have a mixed use on the lot. That's one of the reasons why it's explicitly prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of get where he's coming from, though, with regards to the difference between a drive-through and an outdoor ATM that you can access by the car. Because it's an ATM, it's not a full service.
No, but you also queue up and you're going specifically to it to receive goods. It's almost no different than if the ATM was a person standing there with a teller machine connected to,
Yeah.
because you can still do deposits.
I'm with you on
Yeah.
that, except when I think of a bank and a drive-through,
Right.
include all components. This doesn't have all the components from the bank's perspective.
Mhm.
It has an electronic component.
Right.
So it's got part of the full service of
Yeah.
a drive-through at a bank, depending on how you define it.
Mhm.
So this is a modern age issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is different than the other banks on Shelburne Road. So if you look at those, it's not like any of those. Those are all connected as far as I could tell.
They're drive-throughs.
They're drive-throughs with a teller and pneumatic tubes. So we do think this is,
It's a standalone facility is what a standalone electronic ATM.
right.
It's just an ATM sitting out there.
So for what it's worth, this is something that is typically within the authority of the administrative officer to review. If someone came to me and said, I have, I'm proposing an ATM on Shelburne Road. And we would say, well, I guess that's not a good example. I'm proposing a drive-through on Shelburne Road. That's not an ATM. This is a new rule. New drive-through facilities are prohibited from locating within a PUD. So it's a standalone site in my example, not a PUD. And someone said, I'm proposing a drive-through of some other type. Maybe it's a red box. You pick up your movies. I would have to say no, because drive-throughs are prohibited, and I would define that red box as a drive-through. And that's an interpretation we've made time and time again. Prior to this rule being in place, drive-through facilities for the purposes of banks were allowed.
And they are allowed in the underlying district.
Right.
It's only the fact that it's a PUD.
It's the fact that it's a PUD that prohibits it.
Well,
which is
if they had a bike as a picture as opposed to a car, would we be calling it a drive-through? Or they had two people standing there, because it's a parking lot. It's not a road.
Well, but
I mean, there's living right there, right?
You look at the language,
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
it's unavoidable.
Well,
I mean, it's
except
not even a close question that,
shall include all components.
and
I don't know that
it
this
doesn't
all-
mean, it doesn't mean it has to include, the reasonable reading of that sentence is not that it has to include all components. It says, if it includes any of these components, it's a drive-through. That's what,
Then I would have written it that way. It
Pardon?
doesn't say that. Then I would have written it that way.
So
Right, it
I
says shall.
personally I don't understand why we have this as a rule or as a LDR, but that's not for me to ask. I think when I read this, I conclude that, yeah, this is kind of meets these descriptions.
But I think this is why the regulations allow you as a board to look at this, to take a look at the greater picture and say, is this something that's going to unreasonably damage the site if we have one there? Is this such a bad thing that the handicap can pull up to this and make do their ATM business? Do these people have to transfer to other banks? If it's allowed, if it was a single lot, this wouldn't be a debate. It would be allowed.
Right.
The site is a PUD, because our efforts to make this project work and to bring the housing to the city was to, by combining the three existing lots, it created the bonus that the city brought to us and said, if you combine it all, you can get the number of units that will fund the project. So it's kind of like you step right because you're directed to. Now we find out, oh, because we did what was asked and brought you the components that we were led to believe was what the city wanted. Now, all of a sudden, 6 days ago, we find out that, oh, by the way.
Well, to be fair,
rule has
this has
changed.
been in the rules since February.
And I
of last
think
year.
kind of understanding what you're saying is there's several board members that are saying this is a drive-through. So I think that brings us to the next question. So we understand that it seems as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, the broad interpretation is that this ATM is proposed is a drive-through and it meets that prohibited definition. So our next question would be, is that something that is within the power of the DRB is that a modifiable piece that is, the DRB has the authority to modify zoning regulations as part of the PUD review. So that's our follow-up question, if that is something that the board would be willing to entertain.
Right. So the modification is just like you just discussed for setbacks. It needs to be in support of more efficient, compact, walkable, and well-planned forms of residential development. And all those things that we just talked about. In order to modify a standard, has to be in support of something.
So if you didn't have this, does the whole project fall apart?
I think
It
it's a big
might.
ask where it's been offered for so
Right.
long.
It's been-
Kelly?
So we can't answer that question tonight. That's part of what we needed to solicit the feedback from you all, so that we can do some analysis on our end as to how that impacts the project going forward.
I understand the temptation John had in asking the question, but I think it's not a material question and should be disregarded.
When John asked what question?
I asked,
Does the project
Oh,
stand or
I see.
fall on?
Okay.
I get the force. I know where John's coming from, but I think it doesn't help you read the regulation.
Is it possible for us to take kind of a straw poll? Do that in the middle of the meeting?
Well, let me ask this question because I think Marla brought up a good point that we as a board need to evaluate is, does the addition of the drive-through promote or enhance the project? Or is it just add a component to the Chase Bank element of the project, you know, as a PUD? You know, does it promote the walkability and the, you know, site design? You know, so I guess I would ask the applicant to respond to that so that we as a board can, you know, provide you feedback on an individual basis.
And you might want to take another, since it's a hard ask, you might want to take the time until the next meeting before you try to answer the question.
Duly noted, Frank.
That is probably a good
Because
point.
we are pretty much at time.
And I think we are continuing it anyway, so I don't
Yes.
think that yes or no tonight was going to change the continuance. I think
Absolutely.
taking the 2 weeks just to continue to the next meeting, which is that what we're doing just in the next meeting? Because we're pretty much.
And you can
If
build
there,
up your
if you
argument.
can be prepared, and have no asks of me to revise things, if we can just continue the discussion without any new submissions.
Yes, and I think that would probably imply would be continued for, would we be continued after that, do you think, Marla? Just because there are some, I know that there are things that we need to address with additional documents.
Yeah.
So do you anticipate that would probably lead to another continuance where we could have that time to
Yes.
address?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so we can get you on 2 weeks from now. The other thing that I had on my list, and I wanted to ask you if you wanted to, any feedback on this. There were some pretty significant comments from the stormwater department that may require redesign. Did you have anything that you needed to?
No, Jen, I don't know if you want to speak specifically to that, but we are working on those comments and feel they can be fully addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, I
do
agree.
have
We
one more
don't-
question. I'm sorry. I do have one more question for Mr. Bourne. Exactly, you seem to think that you, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but it sounds like you're saying, well, you were misled about the ATM somehow. Is there something in specific you're relying on that made you think these, what we're calling the drive-through was permissible?
just my interaction with professional staff and the number of times this has been filed. So that's the basis.
So no flags were raised early on, you're
No,
saying?
not until I got what Paul
Right,
referred
so-
to as getting a blindsided call on
Yeah,
Wednesday.
We did, yeah, I think it was an unfortunate finding here that nobody is thrilled to be talking about. And it is, we did present it at sketch plan as well. However, here we are.
Yes.
Yeah, and I will say that maybe this speaks more to the fact that even though everyone is trying to follow all of these regulations, they are very complex and contain conflicting information. So it's allowed in the underlying zoning, but not allowed in a PUD. And it depends on what you think the interpretation of an ATM is and whether or not that provides flexibility under a PUD. There's a lot of gray area here, which is just unfortunate in how the regulations are written.
Okay. I thank you. I would entertain a motion to continue this hearing until March 21st.
I'll make a motion. We continue preliminary and final plat application ST 2305 760 Shelburne Road, Gary Bourne to March 21st.
Second,
Seconded.
and any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? It's carried. We will see you back here on the 21st. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Yes, minutes and other business.
All right.
Stephanie had sent along some proposed edits to the minutes.
Okay. Stephanie, you want to go through your comments?
Just that I was recused on one of the items. I think it was the first one that we had voted on,
Okay.
and it said the motion was carried 4-0, and I was gonna say that'd be 3.
Okay, so noted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments in the meeting minutes?
Just that it's probably good that my comment that I was glad Pier 1 was gone and EMS came back, didn't make it into the meeting minutes.
Well, it's going to now that you brought it up
Yeah,
again.
okay.
Okay, entertain a motion to adopt the minutes.
Second.
Um, okay, discussion, no, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And is there any other business?
Is there someplace we can move this?
I'll pick them up.
Okay, great.
I guess other business, the council is doing hearings for a new member at their meeting on the 20th. We would not expect a new member to join us on the 21st. We would expect a new member to join us on the first meeting in April.
Okay. Thank you. Any other business?
Unrelated to DRB specifically, but just to note how hard Marla and Marty have been working on some of the form-based code projects, including immediately across here, you see earthwork that was approved last summer, and last week Marla issued the zoning permit for 2 new buildings that will be 4 stories, first story commercial, 3 stories of residential above, which is really exciting. So just a
We are
tip
very-
of nod of how much work she does that doesn't even come to the board. So
Say that I really wish that we could get a full review of these form-based code.
Do you?
form-based code, rather than them just being done administratively.
Careful what you wish for, Mark.
I think we are very lucky to have this done.
Yes.
Do anything, do all of these things, this is the question I wanted to ask you, but you should still. But the factual question is, if either of these buildings, these big buildings have pitched roofs perhaps instead of flat roofs?
No.
And the question I have for you, is there some theoretically aesthetic reason that the strong preference for flat roofs, or is it all money? It's all money. It's developer driven, it's all money.
So it's cheaper to build a flat roof? Okay, well, I don't think so.
That's conservative.
Yeah.
It's a desecration of the landscape as far as
Okay, it's late.
All
People have
right.
worked hard. Thank you, Marla. Thank you.
I will note the meeting ended at 10:08
Yes.
PM.
8 minutes late.
good night, everyone.
Thank you.